Hello, happy Thanksgiving. It's time to study. Okay, so we're gonna do one joint at a time, and for each joint, we're gonna do one motion at a time. I'm going to tell you the muscle that does it, how to goni it, what the goni angle is, what muscle you're stretching if you need to stretch it, and then if it is weak, I'm going to show you against gravity and gravity minimized for testing that muscle. Let's get to it. Hip flexion is the first motion. For hip flexion, the muscle performing is the rectus femoris and the iliopsoas. MMT against gravity is in short sit. MMT with gravity minimized is in side lying with the test leg on top. For goniometry, you have them in supine, and the axis is the greater trochanter. The range of motion is 120 degrees, and if you need to stretch, the muscle limiting hip flexion is the gluteus maximus and the other hip extensors. For hip extension, the muscle performing is the gluteus maximus and the hamstrings, the biceps femoris, semimembranosus, and semitendinosus. If you are MMT against gravity, they need to be prone, but if you are gravity minimized, they are side lying with the hip on top. The hip extension goniometry is in prone, and the axis is the greater trochanter. You expect them to have 30 degrees, and if you need to stretch it out for more extension, the limiting muscle would be the rectus femoris or the iliopsoas. For hip abduction, the muscle performing is the gluteus medius and the gluteus minimus. MMT against gravity would be side lying with the test leg on top, but with gravity minimized, you would have them supine. Put a towel under to remove friction. If you're goniometrying, you need them supine, and you use the ASIS as the axis, a line between both ASIS. The range of motion you expect is 45 degrees, and if you need to stretch it out, the muscle limiting abduction are the adductors, the gracilis and the pectineus. For hip adduction, the muscle performing it are the adductors, brevis, longus, and magnus, the gracilis and the pectineus. If you are manual muscle testing against gravity, they are side lying with the bottom leg being the test leg. And if you are minimizing gravity for adduction, they are in supine. For goniometry, you have them in supine and you use the ASIS. You expect 30 degrees. And if they are limited in adduction, the muscle you are stretching is the glute med and the glute min. For hip internal rotation, the muscles performing this are the gluteus medius and the gluteus minimus and the TFL. Against gravity, you would have them in short sit, and to minimize gravity, you would have them in supine with 90-90. The goniometry axis is their patella, and you would have them in short sit, and their foot would go out. You expect 45 degrees, and if their internal rotation is limited, those deep external rotators are the things you're stretching, the piriformis obturators, gemelli, and quadratus femoris. But if now you are testing hip external rotation, the muscle performing are the deep rotators, piriformis, obturators, gemelli, and quadratus femoris. Against gravity, you would have them in short sit, and gravity minimized, you would put them in supine, 90-90, with their leg bent. If you're goniometrying, they're in short sit, and the axis is the patella. The foot goes in as the hip is externally rotating. You would expect 45 degrees, and if they are limited in external rotation, you need to stretch the glute med and glute min. On to the knee. For knee flexion, your hamstrings are performing that motion. Biceps femoris, semitendinosus, semimembranosus. You need to be in prone against gravity, and to minimize gravity, you go into side lying with the test leg on top. The goniometer axis is going to be the lateral epicondyle of the femur, and they're just going to be in supine. You expect the knee to bend 135 degrees, but if it is limited, you need to stretch out the quads, the rectus femoris and the vasti. Knee extension, the muscle performing is the rectus femoris and the vasti, medialis, intermedialis, and lateralis. Your quads do your knee extension. You test it against gravity in short sit, but if they can't do that, move to gravity minimized, side lying with the test leg on top. To goni it, you have them in supine and you use the lateral epicondyle of the femur. You expect 0 degrees for knee extension, but if it is limited and they have some negative number not getting their legs straight, you need to stretch out their hamstrings. For ankle dorsiflexion, the muscle performing it is the anterior tibialis. To test it against gravity is short sit, and if you need to minimize gravity, they can or side lying. The axis is inferior to the lateral malleolus, and the range of motion is 20. If it's tight, you need to stretch out their calf, their gastroc, and their soleus. Ankle plantar flexion is a strange one. The muscle performing it is the gastrocnemius and the soleus, but to test that, you just need to have them do calf raises. If they clear their heel once, they are a 3. If they clear their heel 24 times, it's a 4, and 25 would be a 5. If they can't clear their heel at all, put them in side lying, have them point their toe. Goniometry is the same, inferior to the lateral malleolus. You just have them sitting. You expect 50 degrees, and if their plantar flexion is tight, you got to stretch out their tibialis anterior, the front of their leg. Ankle inversion, the muscle performing is the tibialis anterior and posterior working together to bring that toe in. To test it, you would have them side lying with the test leg on the bottom, but if they can't do that, have them supine or long sit to minimize gravity. The Goni axis is the talus, front of the leg, and have them long sit to measure it. You expect 35 degrees, and if it's tight, you got to stretch out the fibularis brevis and longus. For ankle eversion, the muscle performing is the fibularis brevis and longus, pulling that pinky toe out. If you need to test its strength, you're going to have them side lying with the test leg on top, so that pinky toe goes towards the ceiling. But if they can't do that against gravity, to minimize gravity, you put them in supine or long sit, and the toe just goes sideways. If you need to measure it, have them sit and use the talus bone as the axis. You only expect 15 degrees of ankle eversion, but if that is tight, you will need to be stretching the tibialis anterior and posterior. The big toe MTP flexion is going to be with the flexor hallucis brevis. If you need to test it, have them in supine. There's no plus or minus, so the grades are about their range of motion. If they take any resistance, it's a 4. Put that axis medial to their big toe. You want it to flex 45 degrees, and if it's tight, you got to stretch out the extensor hallucis brevis. Big toe MTP extension uses the extensor hallucis brevis. You have them in supine to test it. And again, the grades for toes are different. There's no gravity minimized. It's just about the range of motion. If you need to goniometer it, you get medial to that big toe and you expect 70 degrees of MTP extension. This is important for walking. If it is limited, you got to stretch out their flexor hallucis brevis. Upper extremity time, shoulder flexion. The muscle performing is the anterior deltoid. Test it against gravity just in short sit. But if they can't do that, put them in side lying with the test arm on top. To goniometer it, you develop x-ray vision and look for the lateral glenohumeral fossa just with them in supine. The complex degrees are 180, but if you stabilize their scapula just for glenohumeral, it is 120. And if shoulder flexion is tight, it might also be limited by the latissimus dorsi. Shoulder extension, we would perform that motion with the muscles teres major and latissimus dorsi. You test it with the patient in prone. If they can't do that, have them side lie with their test arm on top and just kick their elbow back. If you need to goniometer it, have them prone, bend their elbow, and develop x-ray vision for the lateral glenohumeral fossa. You expect 60 degrees for shoulder extension, and the muscle that would be limiting extension is the anterior deltoid. For shoulder abduction, the muscle performing is the middle deltoid and the supraspinatus. If you want to test it, just have them sit there, but if they can't get their arm up, lay them in supine to minimize gravity. If you need to goni it, you're going to have them lay supine, and you're going to just hover over their armpit in the front of that glenohumeral joint. You expect it to be 180 for complex, or if you stabilize the scapula and get glenohumeral, it's only 120. The muscle that you would need to stretch that would limit the abduction is the latissimus dorsi. For shoulder internal rotation, that is your subscapularis doing that for you. If it is weak, you need to put them in prone, and hand will go down to test the internal rotation. If they can't do that, have them short sit and pin their elbow. And then the internal rotation obviously is coming in towards their torso. If you need to goni it, have them supine or prone and just get that olecranon of their elbow. You expect 70 degrees of internal rotation, and if it is limited, you need to stretch out their teres minor and infraspinatus, because shoulder external rotation is performed by the teres minor and infraspinatus. If you need to test the strength of the external rotators, you have them prone and their hand goes up. And if they cannot do that, you have them short sit, pin their elbow, arm goes out. If you need to goni it, they're in supine or prone and get the olecranon of their elbow. You expect 90 degrees of external rotation, and if it is limited, you got to stretch out their subscapularis. Shoulder horizontal abduction, we will not need to goniometer, but you might need to test the strength. So their posterior deltoid is what is pulling their shoulder back in that direction. Testing it against gravity is in prone, 90-90, get that horizontal abduction arm. And if they can't do that, have them short sit, and they're up in 90-90. Similarly, shoulder horizontal adduction, we don't need to measure the range of motion, but we might need to test the strength. You need to test the strength of the pectoralis major for adduction. Have them supine 90-90 against gravity, and if they can't do that, have them short sit up in that 90-90 position. Into the elbow. For elbow flexion, the muscle performing depends on the orientation of the hand, but it's biceps brachii, brachioradialis, or brachialis. To test it, you have them in short sit. If they can't do that against gravity, have them horizontally abduct their arm, and then their gravity minimized elbow will be flexing just in that horizontal plane. If you need to measure it, have them supine, find the lateral epicondyle of their humerus. It would be 150 degrees. And if you got to stretch out, you got to stretch the triceps. Elbow extension, triceps are the muscle that perform that action. So if your triceps are weak and your extension is not strong enough, lay them in prone to test it. And if they cannot get through the range of motion in prone, you switch them into gravity minimized. Again, short sit with that horizontal abduction. They're moving in the horizontal plane that is gravity minimized. If you need to measure the range of motion, have them supine and find the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. You expect it to be 0, but it could be limited as like a negative number, lacking the ability to go straight, and then you would need to stretch out their biceps. For forearm supination, the muscle performing is, shockingly, the supinator. If you need to test it, because it is weak, have them short sit and put their arm on the table. If they can't supinate with their arm flat, hold it up and they have them do a queen wave. This is true for supination and pronation. You can goniometer it by holding a pencil and using the third metacarpal as your axis. You expect 80 degrees of supination, and if it's tight, you got to stretch out the pronators. The muscles performing pronation are the pronators, pronator teres and pronator quadratus. Have them short sit with their arm on the table to test the strength of it. And again, gravity minimized would be that queen wave. You can use the pencil trick for goniometry using the third metacarpal as an axis. You expect 80 degrees for pronation as well. And if you need to stretch out their pronation, it's stretching the supinator. Wrist flexion. The muscles that perform flexion are the flexor carpi ulnaris and the flexor carpi radialis. You can have them sit with their arms supinated on a table, and you can test that against gravity. If they cannot be against gravity, have them point their thumbs up, their wrist in neutral. If you need to goniometer it, have them sit and find their ulnar styloid process. You expect 80 degrees of flexion, and if it's limited, it's because the extensors need to be stretched out. So you would be stretching the extensor carpi radialis and ulnaris. Wrist extension, the muscles performing that are the extensor carpi radialis, longus and brevis, and the extensor carpi ulnaris. Have them sit and their palm is down on a table to test extension. If they can't do that, thumbs up, that neutral wrist, and then they're just extending kind of sideways. If you need to goniometer it, find the ulnar styloid process. You expect 70 degrees of extension, and if you need to stretch out their extension, you will be stretching their flexors, radialis and ulnaris. All right. Radial deviation is performed by a combination of both on the radial side, the flexor carpi radialis and the extensor carpi radialis. When you're testing this, it's only going to be paired with either flexion or extension. So the position you use depends on how you pair it. The axis to measure it is the capitate, and you're going to have 20 degrees of radial deviation. Similarly, ulnar deviation, you're using the pair of muscles on the ulnar side, but both the flexor carpi ulnaris and extensor carpi ulnaris longus and brevis are paired up to do ulnar deviation. You will only manual muscle test it paired with either flexion or extension, so that defines your position. But goniometry, use that capitate. You'll get 30 degrees of ulnar deviation. And if you need to stretch it out, you're stretching the flexor and extensor radialis. Time for scapula action. We do not measure goniometry for the scapula, but there's a few different muscle tests we can do. Elevation, you would be using your upper trapezius and levator scapulae. You would, against gravity, just be sitting there, but if you can't shrug your shoulders when you're sitting, you need to lay down on your belly and be prone. Scapular depression with adduction is when you lay prone, you're testing the lower trapezius, and you make that Y with your arms. Testing scapular protraction, also known as abduction, with external rotation a little bit. That's testing the serratus anterior. You have them sit up and they punch out into your hands to get that position where they're abducting or protracting their scapula. Against gravity is punching above parallel, so they're 120 degrees of flexion, and that's against gravity. But if they can't do that, put them right in line at 90 degrees of flexion and apply your resistance by pushing back into them. For scapular retraction, that is also known as adduction, and it includes downward rotation. If you are testing your rhomboids major and minor, they will lie prone and either do the chicken wing or the Samwise Gamgee, hand on their back like they're reciting poetry. If they can't do that prone, they can do it in short sit, and you don't do any resistance. If you're testing your middle trapezius, have them lie prone and make a T with their arms. Again, gravity minimized is short sit. On to the spine. For thoracic flexion, you are using your rectus abdominis, or you might be using external internal obliques if it is lower. All of the strengthening of your spine depends on the bias, either flexion or extension. I'll get back to that later. To measure the range of motion, you're going to actually use a tape measure between C7 and S2, and you expect them to flex forward 10 centimeters. If their flexion is limited, you need to stretch the erector spinae. The muscle doing the thoracic extension is the erector spinae and the multifidus. To measure the range of motion, you use the same C7 to S2 measuring tape, and you expect them to be able to extend with their hands on their hips backwards for 3 to 4 centimeters. If their extension is limited, you will need to stretch their rectus abdominis. For thoracic lumbar rotation, the muscle performing is the internal and external oblique. The internal oblique is the direction your shoulder is moving up and into. To measure the range of motion, you can use either tape or Goni. The tape goes acromion to iliac crest, and you'd get 4 to 5 centimeters, but to Goni, you'd put a cane in your lap and you'd get 30 degrees. The limiting muscle would be the contralateral, external, and internal obliques that you would need to stretch. Or you could just stretch flexion for that as well. Thoracic side bend, the muscle performing is the quadratus lumborum. You only use a tape measurer. This is going from your fingertips to the floor. You expect them to bend over and get 22 centimeters, but if they are limited, it is from the contralateral quadratus lumborum. Now, the strengthening progression for your thoracic lumbar spine. If they have an extension bias, you find neutral pelvis first, and then you put them in quadruped. They will lift one upper extremity, then they will slide one lower extremity, then they will lift the lower extremity, then they'll do a full bird dog. If they're even stronger than that, they're all the way in prone, lifting one leg, lifting both legs, and being a Superman. If they have a flexion bias, you find neutral, then you put them in supine and have a leg, knee fall out, and then you do the progression of marching one foot, heel sliding one foot, and straight leg raising one foot. If they can do that with the other leg down, then you progress to them using their arms to hold up the other leg and then march, heel slide, straight leg raise. Then, if they can do that, they lift up their other leg, not using their arm, just using their core to hold their other leg, and then go through the march, heel slide, straight leg raise. If they're super strong, they will lift both of their legs at the same time for a bilateral march, heel slide, and full straight leg raise. Finally, the cervical spine. For flexion, you are using your sternocleidomastoid and your scalenes. If you want to measure it, you can use either tape or Goni. You go from your chin to your jugular notch, or you use your ear as the axis. You would get 3 centimeters or 45 degrees. If that is tight, you need to stretch out their splenius capitis and cervicus, as well as their cervical erector spinae. Those muscles on the back of their neck would be limiting their flexion. Those muscles on the back of their neck are the ones that do the extension. So the muscles performing cervical extension are the splenius capitis and cervicus, as well as the cervical erector spinae. To Goni it, you can, again, do either. The tape measure will go from their chin to that jugular notch and get 20 centimeters as they extend, or you use the ear as an axis and they would get 45 degrees. If cervical extension is tight, you need to stretch out their sternocleidomastoid and their scalenes, the anterior scalenes. Cervical rotation is performed by the sternocleidomastoid. It is measured from the chin to the acromion, or using their nose with a goniometer. You'll get 11 centimeters if you use the tape measure from their chin to their tip of their shoulder, or you'll get 80 degrees if you put the Goni on top of their head and use their nose. The muscle limiting rotation, if the left rotation is limited, the left sternocleidomastoid is limiting it. Okay, side bend. The muscles performing a side bend is the scalene, and that with a tape measure is from the mastoid behind your ear, the mastoid process to the acromion, or you can use a Goni, put it right on C7 and make sure you use the occipital protuberance on their skull. You'll either get 13 centimeters with the tape measure or 45 degrees with the Goni. If the left side bend is limited, you need to stretch the right scalene. I know side bend is stretching the opposite scalene, and I know rotation is stretching the ipsilateral sternocleidomastoid. Fun facts. Lastly, if they have an extension bias, you put them in prone and have them tuck their chin, and then they start with a shoulder rotation, and then you go through the liddy. They do the abduction, the Superman, the straight out T, and then the wide Y above their head. If they have a flexion bias, they tuck their chin in supine, and then they go through shoulders flexing halfway, abducting halfway, and rotating halfway, just a little shake it off. But then, if they're stronger than that, they will do a full Superman, which is flexion to full, a full snow angel, abduction to full, and then this ta-da motion from going into their pockets and then throwing their confetti, that is rotation to full. That's it, my friends. Good luck out there.